you could turn to the Gospel of Luke, the 19th chapter. Start at verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost. Amen. I want to talk about faith found on a tree. Faith found on a tree. All of us have a desire to be the best that we can be. There's something in us that wants to climb the top. In corporate America, some would say you want to climb that corporate ladder. You don't want to be in the mail room, you want to be the president. So you have to climb that ladder. And then even in sports, some of us just want to be the best that we can be, that we'll do whatever we have to do to be just that. And I realize for some of us that it's all right to climb the corporate ladder as long as you're making sure that you're not stepping on anybody's shoulders. It's all right to be the best that you can be in the sports field as long as you're not shooting steroids to make sure your body become the best that it can be. Because we have this sick desire that in somehow, in some way, we'll do whatever we need to do to get to the top, no matter the cost. And there's something wrong with that picture. I too once wanted to climb the corporate ladder. So much that I sought out the person that I need to seek. I'll never forget him because we ended up being good friends. I was just a mere person in the insurance field, but he was the technical director. His name was Ted Dorr. He was an Irish guy. And I wanted to climb this corporate ladder, and I knew that he was the gateway. And I needed to meet him. So I sent him an email, went by his door, knocked on his door, and told him who I was. And I was the person who sent him the email. And he said, well, I'll sit down and I'll talk to you. And Ted and I became very close, so much that we would meet once a month in the corporate building having lunch. And I wanted to impress Ted so much that even when St. Patrick's Day came around, I wore a green sweater out of solidarity. Because I wanted him to understand that I was all right. And everybody that was in the lunchroom, because at that time we didn't have anywhere else to go, so everybody would come to the big lunchroom, and I never wore green before, so now everybody see me now with green on, and they started to mutter, talking about me. Look at what he's doing. He's rubbing against the shoulders of a big guy. Come on, Cooper, I thought you was better than that. But I understood that Ted had the gateway. He was the gateway for my success. And if the truth be told, if there was going to be a door open, Ted was the one that was going to open the door. So it did not matter about what anybody else was talking about. I needed the door to be open. And when I read this text, that's what I see. I see Zacchaeus, and he's a tax collector. And to be a tax collector, you was not well liked in this time. For the Roman Empire, they were taxing the people. But they would never use a Roman citizen to do the taxation. They would always pick a Jewish person to have the gatekeeper to be the tax keeper. So the Jewish person would then hike up the taxes, because the Jewish person, the tax collector, he wanted to make sure that his pocket got fat as the Roman government pocket got fat. So this is who Zacchaeus was. But not just the fact that Zacchaeus was the tax collector. If you read the text clear, it declares that Zacchaeus was the chief tax collector. In other words, he was not just a crook. He was the chief crook. All the little crooks was up underneath him, and he was the biggest crook. So as the little crooks' pockets got fat, Zacchaeus' pockets got fat. And it was interesting to me because you never seen the word chief beside anything good. Because I remember Paul saying I was the chief sinner. And we have to think about this thing, that whenever you think about who you are, every now and then, when it's against the odds of God, you have to admit that you are the chief. Never think that you have gotten so far that you're not the chief sinner. Because if the truth be told, you are the chief sinner. Never think that you're just that big of a person. So he was the chief tax collector. So the Jewish people did not like him, because they did not appreciate the fact that the Roman government was taxing them. And they did not appreciate that there was a Jew that was collecting the money. So not only was Zacchaeus ostracized from the Jewish community, but Zacchaeus was ostracized even from the Roman government, because the Roman government did not care nothing about Zacchaeus. They just wanted their money. So as long as Zacchaeus would pass off the money, they were fine. Does that sound familiar? So here we are, the chief tax collector. But he heard about Jesus. He heard about Jesus and all the things that Jesus had did. The rumor began to spread about what Jesus had done. And he knew that Jesus was coming in town, and he decided that I have to see Jesus. But the text makes it clear that Zacchaeus was a short man. I have an affinity towards Zacchaeus. Because me and him share what I think is the same height. But no matter how much money Zacchaeus had, he did not have the influence to clear the people out of his way. And no matter how much money he had to figure out another alternative to see Jesus. And this is what he did. He saw a sycamore tree. And he decided he's going to climb that tree. It's amazing
what you would do for corporate America get to the top. And it's amazing what you would do in the sports world to get to the top. It's amazing what you would do even on the streets to make sure that you're the best that you can be. It's amazing what you would do. But how many of us would climb a tree to see Jesus? But if the truth be told, all of us needed a tree to see Jesus. So I found out in the text, it was not the fact that it was a sycamore tree that made a fact. The reality was he just needed a tree. And we all needed that tree to see Jesus a little bit clearer. And look at it. You know, I know Jesus is a peacemaker, but it wasn't until I began to see him on the tree on Calvary that I understand that he's the King of Kings. I understood Jesus to be the Lamb, but I did not get a clear picture of who Jesus was until I see him on the tree. It was that old rugged tree on Calvary that helps me to understand who Jesus is. I knew Jesus was a Savior, but I didn't know how much of a Savior he was until I see the blood come streaming down his head. We all needed a tree to get a better picture of who Jesus is. So it's interesting that Zacchaeus climbed a tree to see Jesus, and now all of a sudden Jesus is coming through. I find it interesting that Jesus didn't have to go through Jericho, but he did. And something makes me think that he went through Jericho because of the fact that he knew Zacchaeus was going to be there. And I found out that Jesus will always take a special route to get to you and I. That no matter where we are at in life, Jesus will always find us if we make sure we do the work and climb to a place where he can see us. And then we have Jesus coming. I feel like preaching for a little while. We have Jesus coming down this road. And all of a sudden, Jesus looks up. And then he says, Zacchaeus. I find that interesting because he called out Zacchaeus by his name. Now here it is. He's the chief tax collector, but he calls him out by his name. And he does that for two reasons. The first reason is, let's make it honest, the reality of who Zacchaeus was, all of the dirt that he did got back. So he knew who Zacchaeus was. And never forget, no matter how much dirt you do, it can't get underneath God. That you can do dirt, and you may think that the dirt that you do is between you and only one person. But the reality is that God done seen it. And reality also poses that no matter what you do, it will get back to somebody. I hear my text says, whatever is in the dark will come out in the light. So the reality was that Jesus knew of Zacchaeus because he knew Zacchaeus was the chief tax collector, the biggest crook in Jericho, the biggest thief in Jericho. And Jesus knew exactly who he was. But Jesus looked at him and said, Zacchaeus. The other part of Zacchaeus is Jesus knew what he would become. Because the name Zacchaeus means the pure one. That no matter what you have done, and no matter what you are trying to do, and no matter how much of a crook you are, no matter how much of a thief you are, no matter how much of a liar you are, no matter how much of an adulterer you are, no matter how much of anything that you are, God always see you from what you shall be. And that's how he looked at Zacchaeus. So when he called out Zacchaeus, he said, Zacchaeus, come down. I need to sit at your house one night. Zacchaeus found his faith on a tree. Because the moment he came in contact and Jesus saw him, Jesus said, now come down. And here's the reality, y'all. When you come in contact with Jesus, he needs to take place in your house. That he did not say, Zacchaeus, stay where you're at. He said, now, Zacchaeus, I need to come to your house. That's where it says in the text. Look at the text. It says, so he says it clearly. He says he wanted to see who Jesus was, but being a short man, he could not because of the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. I don't know what type of sinner you are, but all of us are a sinner. But if you make your way up to the tree, to make sure you get to wherever Jesus needs to be at so Jesus can see you. And the reality is that most of us get stuck in the crowd. We need Jesus. We stay in the crowd. But the reality, every now and then you have to work a little hard to get to the point where Jesus will know where you're at. And some of us sit back, and I've been amazed by how some folk hurt, but yet and still they stay far away from the church. I'm amazed by how some folk are broken, but yet and still they stay far away from the church. I'm amazed by how some folk have been cheated and have been robbed and have no respect for the church, but yet and still it's the church in which they need, and they stay away from it. I'm amazed. I'm amazed by when we begin to do the things we're not supposed to do, we stay away from the church. I'm amazed. But there's something in us that understands that God knows who we are. And if you just get to the point that it does not matter what the folk will say to you, it does not matter how the folk will critique you, it does not matter how the folk will look at you, the only thing that you have on your mind is I have to get to Jesus. Yeah. And that's the position in which Zacchaeus was at. Zacchaeus realized it does not matter what I have done. It does not matter the wrong I've done. It does not matter how much money I stole. It does not matter how I have cooked and hooked the people. It does not matter because I heard about a Jesus. I heard about how Jesus touched that woman's eyes. I heard about how Jesus took the blind man and made his eyes to see. I heard about Jesus and how he touched the woman who had the 12 years of issues of blood. I heard about Jesus, how he fed the 2 fish and 5 loaves. I heard about Jesus, how he took the person that was a tax collector by the name of Matthew and called him to be a disciple. And if he can do that for them, surely he can bless me. Yeah. And that's where we are at in this text. But realize, when you seek Jesus, he just don't want to talk to you. He want to reside in your house. That you can't speak to Jesus and want to change and then close your door and not have him in your house. The text is clear. When he saw Zacchaeus, he said to Zacchaeus, I need to come to your house. And I'm amazed that Jesus wanted to come into a sinner's house. But then I realized how many times he showed up in my house. And I realized how many times he showed up in my car. And I realized how many times he showed up in my private spot. And then it makes sense that every now and then Jesus wants to show up in your most personal place. If he's ever going to be Lord of Lords and King of Kings in your life, he has to reside in your house. That you cannot just open the door for Jesus. You have to allow Jesus to sit in at your table. And that's what we have in this text. He sat at Zacchaeus' table. And somewhere between the verses of 7 and 6, there was a change when he sat down at Zacchaeus' table. Because Zacchaeus turned around, and all of a sudden Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Now, I don't know what took place at the table, but I understand that the reality is nothing would have changed about Zacchaeus if he would never had allowed Jesus to sit at his table. And you can't have Jesus at your table and still turn out to be the same person. Matter of fact, when Jesus sit at your table, you're not the same father. When Jesus sit at your table, you're not the same mother. When Jesus sit at your table, you're not the same daughter, and neither are you the same son. When Jesus sit at your table and you dine with Jesus, something will change about you. And that's what we found out in this text, because Zacchaeus said, no longer will I rob a folk. No longer will I steal from a folk. Matter of fact, because you are in my presence, the interchange will always dictate an outer change. And there are more folk who say that they have been changed, but they still act the same way. You cannot have the presence of God in you and still have the same actions on the outside. Because I found out for myself, When he found me, I looked at my hands was new. I looked at my feet, they were too. I turned around and I was not the same Kenny. I don't act like the same Kenny. I don't talk like the same Kenny. I don't speak like the same Kenny. I don't move like the same Kenny, because I allowed Jesus to sit at my table. And whenever you allow Jesus to sit at your table, the interchange will produce an outer change. My God, I'm done now, because I found out I found them on a tree. And when I was on my tree, I found out God loves me. And when he looked at me and said, Kenny, I see you. Kenny, you thief. Kenny, you sinner. Kenny, you crook. I looked at him, but then all of a sudden, he said, you used to be a crook, but now you my preacher. You used to be a crook, but now you're going to be a pastor. You used to be a crook, but now there's something new about you. Because I allowed him to take a seat at my table. My house don't look the same. My cars don't look the same. My suits don't look the same, because I allowed him to sit at my table. And look what Jesus said. He said, I came to seek the lost, and I came to give salvation to the lost. And some of us will never be saved until we admit, I'm just plain lost. I'm lost. I'm lost. I'm lost. I'm lost in my ways. I'm lost in my walk. I'm lost in my talking. I'm just lost. Jesus, come save me. Zacchaeus found his faith on a tree. And it reminds me of that song. At the cross, where I first saw the light, and the burdens of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I'm happy all the days. At that tree, that rugged tree, that tree with the bloodstains of the Lamb, I found my faith there, and I've been happy ever since. I have some peace, y'all. I have some peace, because I found them on that tree. On that tree. On that tree. Let me see if I can tell you this one thing. That's the problem with the New Age church, and that's the problem with building buildings with no cross, because the cross is an offense to the folk. But I'll take the cross to be an offense to me, because the reality, it was the cross that saved me. And never get to the point where you don't need a cross in your church. Because if you're at a point where you don't need a cross at your church, what you're really saying, there was no need for Calvary. Matter of fact, the church ain't a church if it has no cross. Let us stand. Zacchaeus did whatever he had to do to make sure he saw Jesus. And we find out that if you're lost and you just give a little effort to get to a point where Jesus can see you, he'll call you by your name. And I don't know what that name will be, but he'll call you by your name. And when he calls you by your name, then he's going to say, let me take a seat at your table. And when he sit at your table, Nothing else will ever be the same. So that's what this moment is all about. We're offering the time for Christian discipleship. And all I'm saying now is there's some folk who may be lost. Now is the time to climb a tree and say, Jesus, here I am. And watch he call out your name. The doors of the church are now open.